You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Greetings, younglings, and welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat, brought to you by those fine lads and lasses over at fanfortracks.com. It's the final week of Ahsoka. Hasn't it come round quickly? And like any other week, this is your spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen Part 8, entitled The Jedi, the Witch and The Warlord, then this is your spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen it, pause this episode and come back and you can join in with all the discussions. So last week's episode, we saw the parting of ways between Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati. Ahsoka made it planet side just when everybody needed her, and she saved Ezra and Sabine, who have been reunited and were making their way with the Noti caravan, who knows where. Thrawn has finished making his preparations and has loaded up all the caskets that the Night Sisters have given him, and he is getting set to depart. That was basically it. So, Part 8 is the finale of Season 1. Let's start off with your initial reaction chat thoughts. What did you think of it the first time you saw this?
The first time I saw it, and I have seen it twice, the first time I saw it, I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not underwhelmed, I'm just whelmed. It feels like this is the 8th chapter of a 9-episode season, but it isn't. It's the finale. So if this episode was sort of mid-season or late mid-season, I'd be, yeah, that was good. But as a finale, visually fantastic, performance-wise, can't fault it. All the constituent parts are great, but just as the wrapping up of what has been a pretty damn good season, and I know people online hate comparing Star Wars projects, and I'm going to compare it to another Star Wars project, Star Wars Andor, which had arguably the greatest final episode of any season of Star Wars and pretty much any other show in the last 5 or 6 years, I would say. Just a phenomenal final episode, Rick's Road. You can't not compare the two. And when you stack the two things to side to side, knowing we've got a season 2 Andor, assuming we've got a season 2 Ahsoka, it was disappointing, I have to say. What did you think of it?
I think Ahsoka overall has been fairly consistent. It's felt like it hasn't really changed its pacing too much. It's been very on track to keep rhythm with what it's doing. And this episode, I think, just ramped it up a little bit. But I do know what you mean. I got to the end of the episode and I was driving into work and I thought to myself, remember those beautiful heady days when you used to get 26 episodes in a season? That would take almost 6 months to watch a whole series of whatever. And now we're getting to the final episode, which is only 8 weeks. Well, not even that, 7 weeks, because we had a double header to begin with.
That's right.
And I think for me, oddly, if we knew the direction of this show, i.e., is it going into a second season or is it going into a film? Is it leading somewhere? Is that actually confirmed? I think I would have a better time. To be honest, I'm going to draw the comparison straight away. It's almost like if you just finished a Fellowship of the Ring and you didn't know the Two Towers was coming out. That's kind of how it felt. They always seem to call in Rick Famuyiwa to direct when there's a lot of set pieces and heavy action. Again, the lightsaber duels were the best I've seen on Star Wars TV, at least. And all the action I thought was great. And that's the thing. It's not like I felt like I wanted to see the next episode. Like, oh my God, I can't wait to see it. But actually, I think I did, like when those credits rolled, I was like, is that it? And then, of course, I had to stay right way through the credits because I'm hoping that maybe there's an end credit sequence that might just kind of like tie it all together and then kind of sell us where it's going to go next.
Or a coming soon, the Book of Boba Fett type moment.
Exactly, yeah, something like that, just to kind of give us a little hint. You could argue and say that with Baylan Skoll on the very edge of that mountain, it was kind of a bit of a cliffhanger, but it kind of wasn't really. I mean, everybody basically ends up where their opposites started. So Thrawn is now in the main galaxy. Ezra's in the main galaxy. Ahsoka, Huyang, and Sabine, they're now in whatever you want to call it, the Peridia galaxy. Or I quite like that. It feels like you've kind of got halfway round a rotation of a clock. However, just feel like we need to go somewhere more with this. It would be nice to have that kind of sense of security that something is coming for Ahsoka sooner rather than later.
There was no sort of explanation or cost really to Sabine's actions, in that she's risked insane risk just to get Ezra back, because that's what she wanted. I think there is a good sequence in the explanation of Huyang sort of saying the reason that Ahsoka didn't continue the training of Sabine, as he says to Ezra when he's building his lightsaber, was that, there's just been the sacking of Mandalore, all of her family are dead. She didn't want to train Sabine with the risk of Sabine turning potentially because of the anger. Yeah. Vengeance, she's a Mando, so that's kind of in their DNA. That was good to get that explained, because we have kind of wondered, why did Ahsoka walk away? Well, now we know Ahsoka didn't walk away for any bad reason. She actually walked away for a very good reason. So that was quite important. I thought that was quite a useful scene. And
quite satisfying. And I think they did it nicely. It was handled well. I wasn't kind of dwelt on too much, but it was just enough. Maybe it's still a little bit of foreshadowing. I know we see a little bit of Sabine unlocking her force powers and stuff near the end of the episode and that, but as we know, it's a fine balance between the light and the dark side, and it's very easy, as we've been told on numerous occasions, that once you do start down that dark side, it will dominate you. So exactly. So therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if there's still some darkness in her future.
There's a lot been teased and there's a lot been set up. And you mentioned the word cliffhanger when you see Baylan literally on the edge of a cliff. And also sad that that's the last thing we'll see of Ray Stevenson in that role, because he's stole the season for me. If it had been a cliffhanger, even if we were waiting a year, I think we'd all go away a lot more satisfied. But as it stands, I think Deadline put a piece out saying there's talks of a season 2, but nothing's nothing's set in stone. We of course had the real world issues of the writer's strike and the actor's strike. Well, of course, realistically, we know that's going to push things back. So if there was a season 2 of this, if they did announce it on New York Comic Con next week, I don't know, and they do a talk and they say, yes, there's going to be a season 2 of Ahsoka. There's definitely going to be a season 2 of Ahsoka, but you won't see it till 2025, let's say. At least you'd know. But a cliffhanger would have been more satisfying, because that's a thing, isn't it? A cliffhanger is kind of a thing. This just felt like they kind of went, oh, we've only got 8 episodes. Oh, let's just leave it there.
And do you know what? It does make me think if Dave has at least done a full story arc. So whilst maybe the scripts haven't been necessarily written, but he knows where these characters are eventually going, which is why they've been able to pace it the way they have, because they know where it's going to end up, and it's going to take some time. And so when we get there, that's when we're going to be rewarded. And that's the thing, like, they do have this tendency a lot of times to reward us for kind of sticking with the series and that, and you hopefully get these payoffs. What they do with Baylan Skoll, I mean, it's kind of like he's kind of in this weird position whereby they could almost leave it where it is and keep it completely vague, or to recast a character. We've only had one season with Ray Stevenson, and as much as he is fantastic, I think we could probably find somebody to at least do anything better.
Succeed him rather than replace him. Yeah,
that's a much better term, putting it. Yeah, succeed him, and that in itself might open up other avenues. Because obviously you don't want to get into that kind of almost a situation we had at Rise of Skywalker, where we're like, we need to kind of wrap this up, but everything we had planned was basically, wrapped around Carrie Fisher and her character, to then obviously have to pivot dramatically.
Hi, this is Ethan Sachs, writer of Bounty Hunters, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. There's
been some positives. The back and forth between Ezra and Sabine, and some of the chemistry seems to have started to kind of gel. It's taken a while, and part of this is a story thing. We've seen that since Ahsoka's trip into the World Between Worlds, or her concussion, or whatever it was that she had her own internal reconciliation with what Anakin's done. You can see how that's moved her on as a character. I still don't necessarily think it's as obvious as it could be at points, but I think we're definitely getting somewhere. So hopefully, again, if we see a season 2, we'll see that kind of develop.
There's plenty of opportunities to take the characters forward, with Huyang obviously now more embedded in the broader story. He's got information he can sort of impart, and he kind of chuckles it out. I do get the sense that with droids like him and R2's sort of very good at keeping his counsel, as a security measure, and I think Hu Yang's kind of falls into that. It doesn't give too much away, so I like that from a character point of view and from a story point of view, that you can roll out all these little nuggets. It's great for the writers as well.
You could literally have Tales of the Jedi as told by Hu Yang. We've actually got a character who would be a bystander and a literal observer. If you were, you could do something like that with, say, Yoda, but Yoda is going to be a lot more kind of pivotal to probably those events, whereas Hu Yang will be on the outskirts and will be a lot more objective in his retelling. For 3 new characters that we've not seen in any Star Wars really before. Hu Yang we've seen in one episode of Clone Wars, but him and Bane and Skull and Shin Hati, they are the most interesting of the characters that we've met in this series.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They've come into this new mythos, and it's well established. And I think now that we're at the end of it, I think anybody who's watched the whole thing, as somebody who's got a fair knowledge, a passing knowledge of what happened in Rebels and Clone Wars. I'm no expert on Rebels or Clone Wars. I know enough to watch this without being lost. But there are people who are real deep divers on both of those shows. They will have pulled out a lot of stuff, enjoyed the nuggets and the details that might have gone over my head. But then anybody who hasn't got any kind of passing knowledge of Rebels or Clone Wars, I think, would have struggled. So I think that's quite evident now we're at the end of it, that a bit more knowledge on those shows would have been useful. I think Lucasfilm could have probably worked a little bit harder to sort of prep viewers with information. They did all those Rebels recons and Clone Wars wrap-up shows back in the day. There's information they could have collated that would have been quite useful week on week as a something on StarWars.com's YouTube channel, just to prime people. Not so much of what's coming, that's, you don't want to preempt, but what's happened and give a bit of background to it. For example, this week, Sander does our guide on Fantha and mentioned the sword that the Night Sisters create for Morgan. Yeah, and it's the Sword of Talzin, and I completely forgot that was seen in season 6 of the Clone Wars when Talzin has the fight with Mace Windu. It was only going through the article and trawling around for photographs and pictures. Oh my goodness, I completely forgot about that. So there's things like that doesn't affect the viewing of the show, because I didn't know it when I watched it. It was only when I researched it I realised. So things like that it's not the same, but there's certain things they could have done that would have made it a little bit easier on themselves, because it is quite deep in the mythos. So going back to Balin and Shin, I think they've been a fantastic addition to the storyline, because clearly there's a whole master and apprentice relationship between them two you could explore. There's his history with the Jedi during the Clone Wars era, how she came into it, where did he find her? Lots of fresh ground to explore with those two. Yeah.
Unless, of course, again, this is something that we'll find, if you jump back into Bad Batch season 3 or something, and, as an episode, and we see like a younger Balin Skull maybe rescuing a Shin Hati from...
Hey, you may have just landed on something there, mate. You really might have done, because we did have Mandalorian and then Fennec Shan turns up in Bad Batch. So you say that almost as an off-the-cuff comment, but there's every chance that what you've just said could come to pass.
And this is, I think, one of the bigger debates around this series, isn't it? It's, okay, yes, you can argue, well, there's a issue with how you tell the story to somebody who hasn't seen something before, and how much do you kind of have to impart as really dry, boring exposition, and how much you can kind of like hopefully get away with either audience supposition and stuff. And then there's, trying to connect these characters going forward in our timeline and in our lives and stuff. And so that could work, because at least then if we see this and then they drop him into the Bad Batch, a lot of people would be more likely to expect that, and then would probably chance, to watch a Bad Batch for that if they want to find out more about him.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Thrawn has now connected the Chimera to the ring to hyperspace jump back to our galaxy, if you want to call it that, the Prime Galaxy. The whole process of that was fantastically well designed and fascinating to watch. But we have a sequence where the Jedi, Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra are working their way in on the Howlers, after they've been attacked, their starship's been taken down. Now Hu Yang's working on it with the Noti to fix it, and they're racing to get inside the temple to work their way up, which they do. And you see the tension on Thrawn's face, which I thought was a great little scene because he's not giving much away. It's just very subtle. We essentially get the Death Troopers, the Night Troopers, the Zombie Troopers, whatever you want to call them. What did you make of that sequence?
After we saw what happened to poor old Marek, and seeing how those stormtroopers were looking, even though I think there's nothing to suggest that they were all like undead, and actually I think based on what Thrawn said was like your sacrifice will mean whatever to the Empire. I think those were proper human stormtroopers until they died, and then that's when they kind of get reanimated afterwards. But those two Death Troopers, literally by name, when the guy's like helmet gets split open and stuff, and like he's kind of got that kind of decayed classic zombie kind of look. I really quite liked all of that. It was kind of menacing. I mean, I think it was explained well enough for it to all make sense. And I mean, the action was really cool, and it felt a little bit more OT. Like it was like, oh, we're just safe, and now we're still not completely safe, and there's more of them, and that. And so I liked that, and I liked like them having to work their way up, and seeing how the combat kind of develops, and how like Ezra's new lightsaber is blue and stuff. I always like it when you have a blue and a green lightsaber. That kind of always on the screen anyway, visually looks quite appealing to me. I think even with not having any real explanation as to what's in those caskets, I think we've now got probably a better understanding as to what is in those caskets and where those are going to go. We've had Death Troopers, as in like the Plague Dead Troopers from the books, going back about 10, 15 years now. That was quite an interesting experiment as it's in its own right. Did they work for you, like in the Star Wars aesthetic as we have them now?
The reanimated troopers, the broken, red-wrapped, gold-laced troopers being reanimated, I think made sense because it's exactly as you said. Thrawn alludes to their sacrifice and that they're aware of what they're offering to do. If they die, they'll be brought back. And so I thought that was well done, effective. The use of the magic with a CK was quite smart. So I like that. The two big bruiser sort of death trooper types that were quite clearly classic zombies, I wasn't so keen on because they were just zombies from The Walking Dead to me. And zombies in the classic sense, they shouldn't be zombies in the classic sense. I don't see why they have to do the noises and the, snapping and biting. It was just, again, straight out of The Walking Dead. So, why they would have to be mindless zombies as opposed to they're conscious and aware they've literally just died, whatever. I guess that's what the white armored stormtroopers, your regular stormtroopers were. They were dead and then they're back and they know what they're doing because, it's pretty much instantaneous that the Night Sisters bring them back. But the other two were just zombies. I wasn't so keen on them. That being said, the sequence was brilliant. You pointed to the action earlier. I thought the Morgan Ahsoka lightsaber fight in this was absolutely white hot awesome. So I loved all of that. I loved the way that the three of them, Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra, were sort of deflecting the laser bolts. There was a smoothness to their actions. They were reading what was happening, even though clearly Ahsoka was deep in it. I loved the movement, the performance there. But the way that Sabine and Ezra took out those two, again, I'm not mad keen on them, but took out those two Death Troopers, let's call them. I thought that was really cool. I like the way that they were dispatched. The one was very sort of Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi when she puts the saber to his head.
Yeah, really
enjoyed that.
Much. Yeah. The fighting was cool, and I had kind of wondered when we were going to see, like, basically the rematch from season 2 of Mando with Diana Lee. She knows how to fight, and so I'm glad they kind of saved it for the last part. And again, I quite like how she kind of realizes that she's been double-crossed, been taken for a ride a little bit.
Oh, totally. It's all over her. Even though she's black eyes, skin's sort of starting to mottle, and she knew that she'd been played.
But yet she's, do you know what? This isn't for the Empire. This is for Dathomir. This is for the rebirth of Dathomir and the Night Sisters. So, hopefully they will celebrate her sacrifice.
But what did you think of that? In that moment, Thrawn is saying, for the Empire. And we see, quietly to herself, Morgan say, for Dathomir. She knows what's happening in our galaxy, let's say. How much, I wonder, has Thrawn been told of what's the situation back home? Because I think you kind of have to assume these characters, when they're talking to each other, The only thing we can assume that they say to each other is what we see them say to each other, that they're not having off-camera conversations, because, that doesn't really work for drama. You kind of have to see the interaction. So I just wonder how much he knows, because it seems like he's expecting more when he gets home than perhaps he's actually waiting for him. We saw the Shadow Council in Mando Season 3, which, again, I want to revisit, because I think there's going to be stuff in there that's going to have a whole new perspective now we've seen Ahsoka. I think we said it last week. I wonder where that ship's going to go. I said, maybe they just quietly go somewhere out the way and don't dive into it. But then I think we also spitball, hey, wouldn't it be cool if they just rocked up over Coruscant and started battering the crap out of it? Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a halfway house, really. But her loyalty clearly is to Dathomir, even though, like you said, she knows she's been screwed over. I just wonder what you think on that.
Well, I suppose it comes down to what the Great Mothers think they're getting out of this. They're subservient to the Empire, but also at the same time, Thrawn's kind of like, can I have a favour? But the power dynamic very much is with Thrawn, because ultimately he's the one who can get them to the other galaxy. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have two different end goals, but they're working together, because at the moment everything kind of like their priorities are aligned. They both need to get to the other galaxy, and perhaps, like I said, the Great Night Sister, they're there to kind of rebirth the Night Sisters, and maybe in a stronger way than they have been. And whether or not that, then they just become an ally to the Empire and just help Thrawn to kind of get his foot in that. And then again, it could be the case that he's using them as a resource until he can kind of bring the parts of the Empire under his control, and then at that point, that's when he creates his attack. But it'll be interesting to hear what Ezra says to Hera. When there's a season 2, how far do we jump? Do we jump just a couple of days or a couple of hours into the future, or is it like 6 months and the whole galaxy's gone to crap? That would be quite interesting, because there's two ways you can look at it. We can continue this slow build of like Ezra comes back, and then obviously you almost have the same repeat of Senator Ziono kind of saying, I don't believe a word of you. Where have you been, Ezra Bridger? Who are you? You're nothing, blah, 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 blah. Or do you, just kind of cut to like 6 or 12 months later, and actually the galaxy's basically in civil war again. And actually we don't necessarily need to see how they got from the end of this season to the start of season 2, because it's almost self-explanatory. So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, there's different ways of doing it. And I think it all kind of comes down to how, in particular, Filoni wants to kind of pitch it. Is it like a slow burn kind of series, and it's going to continuously build, or are we going to have these jumps? This is, like we said, all along in this record, it's, there's so much left open that it does give us a lot of opportunities to speculate if you want to. I'm kind of at the point whereby I'm now just like, I don't want to speculate. I just want to see it. I want to see what's happening. Definitely don't want to have to wait 2 years for that to happen. If we didn't know the schedule was going to be for like Andor, and that was definitely going to be season 2, how our perception of that series would potentially shift afterwards, especially in the last episode. Knowledge is a powerful thing.
It really is. And on that topic, knowledge, we've watched Sabine struggle with interacting with the Force, not being able to move the cup, which stole that episode. And now in here, especially in this one, all of a sudden she's using the Force to open doors. She's recalling her lightsaber. She's throwing Ezra from the platform to the Star Destroyer. It's almost like, it might be a lousy comparison, or maybe not. It's almost like Rey suddenly snapping into the Force in The Force Awakens 30 years in the future, where, it's a different era for the Force, let alone the galaxy. Sabine seems to have had this out of nowhere awakening. Yeah. Do you think it's because she's reunited with Ezra and it's given her a confidence? Do you think it's just all falling into place? What do you think the reason is?
It's probably a bit of both. I think, having Ezra there as well probably is a confidence thing. And also, as we know, like the Force works in kind of slightly mysterious ways. And George himself has said that like everybody has a Force. It's whether like you tap into the dark side or the light side, and also how aware you are that you're tapping into it. It's like immersing yourself in the environment as well. And she's spoken to Ahsoka, so Ahsoka's kind of trying to get into her head a little bit, or it could be the dark side. Who knows? She could have just let go and just kind of gone, this dude is going to die. I want to kill this dude. Otherwise, he's going to kill me. And so, self-preservation, possibly a powerful motivator when it comes to the midichlorians. It did feel very Rey. Suddenly, she's kind of gone from 0 to 10 in the space of like a very short period of time. On the flip side, we don't know how far down the road she got with Ahsoka, how good her Force powers were back when they first started to train in until she parted ways. And it's clearly evident that between then and the start of the series, she hadn't really used it. So she could just be a little bit rusty.
Yeah, it could be that. I think she gets in her own way a little bit as well. I think the fact that she only sketches out to Ezra the way that they got to that galaxy to rescue him. And I think if he'd known, he would have said, for goodness sake, don't do that. Look at the incredible risk. And we end with all the overspill of that gambit heading back to the galaxy when the people who are probably best placed to save the galaxy from that threat are in the other galaxy. So that's an interesting wrinkle in terms of the storyline there. Hey, maybe season 2 we'll see Luke get involved. I don't know. You can spitball any idea you like, really. But with Sabine suddenly clicking with the Force, to my read anyway, because she's kind of not locked herself off, but got in her own way. Now that Ezra's cool with her and he's been found and they're reunited and there's a bond, and Ahsoka hasn't chewed her out and blamed her for this reckless, and it is reckless, act that's put our galaxy at risk. She's not been given a chewing out there. I think she's just kind of relaxed. And now being a Mando, she's in combat. They thrive in combat. Can't not factor that in. I guess from Ahsoka's point of view, it would have been very easy to have not lashed out, but been firm and I'm not happy with this. And you did the wrong thing, and said the things that she could have said. But Hu Yang explains, well, she didn't want to go in down that dark path. Clearly, Ahsoka thought that was a potential possibility for what could have happened with Sabine. And that never came to pass, thank goodness. So maybe now they're all at the point where they can just sort of relax and go with it. So I think there's a few different perspectives on that one if you want to look at it.
Hey, it's Alyssa Wong, writer of Dr. Aphra, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Even with Ezra, it's a big jump. I mean, literally. And it's a big jump from where his Force powers were last week by the seams of those slightly ineffectual kind of Force pushes that he was doing, which were a little bit kind of weak. Again, if he's rusty, he's shaking the ring rust off pretty quick. But yeah, ballsy move to kind of try and take that leap onto that Star Destroyer, because that wasn't exactly close. It's all down to like where you kind of think people's abilities lie and who you're comparing them to, really. Because like you think, well, many a Jedi wouldn't have been able to do that in the height of their powers, let alone somebody who's a little bit rusty and basically an apprentice. And for them both to do it, or to work together, I thought that was cool. I think that's pretty much the only justification you can kind of use to get there, because like it was a bit of an extreme jump. But hey, maybe the Force works slightly differently in this other galaxy. Who knows? Yes, I did think a number of different ways to justify this.
I mean, obviously the Force is accessible in this galaxy. We see Anakin's Force Ghost, actual Force Ghost, turn up at the end, which was a lovely touch. I did appreciate that for what it was, and also the fact that Sabine sensed it. And clearly Ahsoka sensed it, but you very much got the feeling that neither saw him. His presence was there. A bit like at the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi when Qui-Gon turns up and he's kind of saying, well, I've always been here. He's alluding that I've always been here, but, it's never quite coalesced in the way that it did at the end of that. So it's weird that you end up 2 seasons with basically the same thing. You end up Obi-Wan with Qui-Gon, his master reappearing. You end Ahsoka with her master Anakin reappearing. So it's a nice parallel there. And both were very well played, and great to see those actors and performers back in the role.
And I suppose really, what's the chances? Second season of Obi-Wan before we see a second season of Ahsoka? I don't know. Do not worry. Reaction Chat will be back for next time some Star Wars content drops, wherever that is.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch, and check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Until we catch up with you again,
take care, look after yourselves. May the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Collecting Tracks.